Welcome to part 2 of week 2, splines and generators. This video is going to cover generators. Because splines do not generate any geometry on their own, we need generators. Generators need to be in a parent-child relationship with the splines, where the generator is the parent and the spline is the child. We will be going over 5 generators in this video, and you can find them all in this menu. The first one we're going to cover is the extrude generator. What the extrude does is that it generates geometry out of whatever shape your spline is. So let's take it out and practice with a primitive spline. I will take out a flower. Make the flower spline a child of the extrude, and you can immediately see what it does. You can think of a real-life example as those Play-Doh extruders that you would put Play-Doh on, and then you push and you get the Play-Doh to come out in the shape that the extruder had. This is exactly what the extruder does. Looking at the properties of the extrude, the first one is direction. It is set to auto, which is automatic, and this tries to know which dimension your original spline is in and then extrudes in that dimension. So for example, if I take out my flower and I change the plane of it to XZ so that it is laying flat, if I make it a child of my extrude again, you see that now the extrusion is happening up and down. And if I again, while I am here in my flower properties, change it to XY, my extrude automatically knows that now I want the extrusion to happen in the Z, the depth. But you can change that to X, Y, and Z. And then you have custom, which allows you to change it in 3 dimensions at the same time. So you can make it be diagonal. The next option that we have is offset. Offset is how much of the extrusion is happening. So right now it says 93 centimeters. So that means that from this point where the spline is at, so this is where the spline lives, it is right flat here on my YX plane, as you can see right here. From where that is to this back part, that is 93 centimeters. And if I increase it, you will see that the extrusion gets bigger. Subdivisions are the subdivisions that get added in between your extrusion. So I will change my display to garage shading lines so you can see that when I increase the subdivisions, they get increased from the front to the back of the extrusion. This would be useful if you wanted to, for example, bend the extrusion. As you would need these subdivisions to actually bend it smoothly. Jumping over these 2, I want to get down to hierarchical. This option by default is checked off, which means that the extrusion is only recognized in one child. So if I add more splines into this, so for example, my rectangle spline or my cogwheel spline, it is only recognizing the first child of this extrusion. But if I check this option on, it will extrude all 3 options with the same attributes. Now let's jump over to the caps menu. Every generator that I will show you has a caps menu, so I'm only going to cover it for this one, and then I'll briefly just mention it for the other ones. Think of caps as an object's lid when they're closed volumes. In the caps tab, we can round the edges of these lids, similar to checking on fillet on primitive objects to round the edges. I want to introduce a new vocabulary word, which is bevel. A bevel edge is an edge that is joined together and smoothed out by any angle that's not 90 degrees. Usually, this is used for rounded edges on geometry. When you fillet an object, you create beveled edges. In the caps tab, you have a few attributes here. You have your start and end cap, and these are those lids that I mentioned. So whether you don't want this to be a closed volume, you can check that on or off. You have this option to separate the controls so that you can create different bevels for the front and the back. Usually you want to leave this off as you want to bevel things equally. The size is how many centimeters that edge will be beveled. This is similar to fillet size. And your segments are how many segments, so how many lines, how many times the space from here to here is subdivided to again make that rounding be smoother. This is with just 1. This is with 10. It is very important that once you are done modeling, you bevel your edges because it makes the lighting interact with your object differently and they overall look more finalized and better. One thing I want to mention here, notice how I just beveled my edge and the only things that were beveled were the caps, right? So the front and the back. If in the case of this rectangle, I wanted everything to be rounded, this shape is happening because of the sharp edge of this rectangle. So if I wanted that to be rounded, I would need to turn on rounding in the rectangle itself, and that would round those edges. Obviously, this is a little much, but there you go. Now we have a filleted cube with beveled edges. Let's do a practice with the extrude object that you're going to upload to assignment generators. All right, so let's practice with the extrude generator. We're going to bring in this image from the computer. So for this assignment, we're going to create both. I'm only going to create one with you and then I'll leave you to create the other one. First thing that I want to do in my brand new Cinema 4D file is to make sure that my render settings are set correctly. So instead of redshift, that should be set to standard. And then because I'm going to load in a reference image, I don't want to be in my perspective view. I want to be in my front view. I'll go and drop in my extrude practice. And then in here, I want to reduce the transparency of this. So I'll go to Mode, View Settings, and the back tab, and then increase the transparency so that I can see a little easier with my spline tool. Since I'm only going to do one, it's going to be the Superman one. I'm going to just move this over until the S is sort of aligned with the center. All right, so now I want to go to my pen tool, and the first thing that I want to do is the outline here. So I will turn on my snap-in tools and then make sure that my grid work plane is checked on because I want my snap-in tools to be the ones that decide kind of where these points are going to land. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're just going to use this as a reference. So I will create the first point here. And then this outline is all just going to be linear interpolation. So I'm just clicking once and letting go. Second point right there. This does not have to be absolutely perfect. You don't have to completely match the outline. We're just getting it as close as possible. All right, now that I have that first one, I want to create the inner one. So I will follow the same steps. Make sure that your spline object is selected because I want to add this next spline that I'm going to make to this one. So I will do the same idea. Okay, so now we have the spline object here. So I will name that outline. And now I'm going to turn off my snap-in tools, but I'm going to make sure that these points are aligned because they may not be. So for example, if I select this one and this one, even though they were snapping to the grid, it doesn't mean that the grid points are going to be exactly in the same position. So I will select both of them, and I'm also going to select these two on the outer edges, press scale to scale together. And once I start scaling, that's when I want to hold shift until I get to 0%. And now all of these are on the same line. Again, look, this isn't completely matching my outline. That's totally fine. The outline is just a reference. Now I want to make sure that these are proper. So I'm going to do this to 0. Same thing here. Same thing here. All right, now that I have this, I am going to click out of my outline because now I'm going to make the S with the spline pen and I want that to be a separate object. So I will make my first point as close to where the outline is as possible and then continue making points from that point on. Again, this does not have to be absolutely perfect as long as it sort of resembles what we are working with. So this one's going to be a combination of soft interpolation points and hard interpolation points. Notice that if I'm not happy with the way the curve is looking, I just do Control Z to undo it and then try again. I will hold Shift to break this tangent because now I have to make a sharp turn here to make this point. Same thing here. Once I'm done, hold Shift so that I can break the tangent. If you don't like the spline, use Ctrl Z and try again. It's totally okay that the outline and the S are crossing each other. Now, after the fact, I can go in here and fix some of these points. I'm gonna add a point right here. Fix this edge. Make sure these two are aligned by selecting them with the selection tool and then scaling them together in Y. Okay, once I'm happy with the way that the logo looks, name this S and then take out the extrude generator. Make both the S and the outline children of it. And go to my extrude, turn on hierarchical in the properties. So notice what's happening right now. The outline is being extruded to the positive of Z, whereas the S is being extruded to the negative of Z. So what I want to do is that instead of having the direction set to auto, in this case, it is not correctly guessing where I want it to go. I'm going to just manually set that to Z so it knows that I need it to extrude to the positive of Z, which happens to be backward, but that's the positive of Z. And in this case, 100 centimeter. Last thing I want to do here, go to my caps and make sure that I round those edges so that it looks nicer. And that is the logo. Now create the next one and upload both of these to the assignment generators. The lathe rotates a spline about the y-axis of the world axis, and it generates geometry as it is doing this. It does a full revolution around y. You can think of what the lathe is doing as a tether ball that just goes around the pole, and as it is going around, it is creating geometry for you. This is mostly useful for creating cups, bottles, vases, etc. When you want to create something like a bottle, make a spline that has the first point as close to the y-axis as possible, and then create your shape. You're only creating one outline of the shape, and for something like a bottle, you also want to think about how your object would be in real life, right? So your object in real life would have some sort of thickness. So if I were to just put this as it is in a lathe, you'll see that there is no thickness to this. This is just a very thin piece of geometry. So if I actually wanted it to be a vase that would be functional, I would need to create this outer outline plus an inner one. I would then close this down here, holding Shift. And you see this here, I want to fix this. I would go to my points, flatten them out, and then bring this as close to 0 as possible so that there is no hole at the bottom of this. Turn on my lathe and you will see that now I have a vase that has thickness. So if you're wondering, why do I want this so close to Y? Because otherwise there would be a hole. So I'm going to select them to show you. If I were to have started the spline over here, because of what the lathe is doing, it does not matter where the spline is. The lathe is going to go around Y. So as it's going around Y, it would look like this, like an extrusion of the shape, and then it would go around Y. And because I didn't connect it to the Y axis, now there is a hole at the bottom of my vase. So anytime that you're dealing with the lathe, if you want to create something like a bottle or a glass or something like that, you want to make sure that these points here at the center are zeroed out in X, which is left and right, and that means that they're aligned to Y. So select them, align them to each other, holding Shift with the scale tool, and then in the coordinates manager, type in 0 here. If you notice, I was using the attribute angle already to show you how the lathe works, because the angle starts with just an extrusion of your spline and then continues on in the degree until it reaches 360. By default, it is automatically set to 360. Then you have your subdivisions. The more subdivisions you have, the rounder your object will be. But again, remember, there is such a thing as too many. If your subdivisions are starting to look like this is way too many. As long as your object looks round enough, that is enough subdivisions. Then you have movement, which changes the distance from the end of the lathe to the start of it. And you have scaling, which again takes into consideration where the lathe ends and where it starts. So now I am telling it to end 50% smaller than it started. And once again, your lathe also has caps. So if I were to have selected this shape and then round out these edges, that's how that would look. This is an image from Maxon's website that if you see, you only have to draw one part of whatever cup, glass, bottle, vase you want to draw. You only want to draw the silhouette of it, and then because the lathe is going to go fully around, it will create the shape for you. Okay, so now let's practice with the lathe. The image that we're going to bring in for the lathe is the one called Lathe Practice. And since it's a reference image, we want to load it in the front view. So we want to go here and we can just click and drag it and drop it in. Once we are here, we need to go to Mode, View Settings, and the back tab for a few reasons. Number one is to increase the transparency so we can see better, because otherwise the white is a little bit too harsh on the eye. And number two is that because I told you that the lathe works surround in Y, if we start drawing our spline from all the way over here, this is just to give you an example, and then put the spline as a child of the lathe, look at how the geometry is coming out. Because again, like I mentioned previously, the lathe does not care where your actual spline is. It only cares that it's going to go around Y. So if I draw it over there, I would have to then bring it in to actually get the shape of this. So what I want to do is in my view settings, I want to use the offset of X and Y to align my bottle. So again, I'm going to do one of these bottles with you and you're going to do the other one on your own. So I will move it to the left in X and to the top in Y until it is near the center of Y, as close to it as we can. It does not have to be perfect. Once I'm happy with this, I will use my spline pen tool to the first point should be as close to Y as possible. When I say as close to Y, that means that it needs to be zeroed out in X. We can turn on snap it and put it there, but we can also just put it there as it is now and then later on fix it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to put it as close to it as possible. Notice in my coordinate manager, it's not completely at 0. So I will have to come in here and fix it so that there's no hole here, but that's for later me to worry about. So that's the first point. And now I'm going to create the outline of this bottle. This bottle will have a lot of soft interpolation points. Remember, if you don't like how your spline points are connecting, just undo. And once I get to the top of the bottle, remember, we need to make an inner outline so that this bottle is not just a flat piece of geometry. We actually need it to have thickness. And once I get here, I need to get this as close to 0 as possible as well, and then close it. So these points are not my final points. I can always go in here. I'm going to use my brush selection to select them and move them as I need to. The first thing I'm going to do is align these two. So I'll select both of them, go to my scale tool, align them together on the X axis. So start scaling, hold shift once I start until I get to 0. And then once I have this here, I want to zero them out in X so that they are right at Y. I just type in 0, press enter, and that just zeroed that out in X. Remember, the coordinate manager is right here. I'll move it down slightly as well. It does not have to be perfect. This does not have to be zeroed out in Y. All right, so remember, I can go back here and fix the points that I don't think look good or that could use a little additional fixing. So with my pen tool, I can go here and start moving things around. Okay, once I am happy with the way that this looks, I will take out a lathe. and make the spline a child of the lathe. Okay, looks all right. One thing I want to fix, there are a few points here that are giving me a sharp edge, and that is because the tangent of this point is a little bit too sharp. So, a few ways to fix that. We're going to do it the easier way, which is to use the Spline Smooth tool. So I will leave my 4-panel view open so that you can see what's happening in the perspective as I go here and fix it in the front view. I'm going to reduce the strength because I don't want it to smooth it out that much. I just want it to slightly smooth it out. And I will get close to this point that is the problem. Click and drag slightly. And what that did is it took that one point and split it into 3 in a smoother way. Again, the Spline Smooth works like a little iron. And now we don't have that cut there anymore. We can still probably smooth it out a little bit more. And there we go. We don't have that there. Same thing happening around here. It should not be this sharp. So I'm going to scroll up to where that problem is. And it's right here. I am using Q on my keyboard as a shortcut for my object activation. Just want you to know that. Then I'm going to do it very slightly here. And there we go. Great. Make sure that none of your inner spline points, so the inner geometry of this, are crossing outside. And that is it. That is your lathe exercise. The next generator is the Loft. The Loft object stretches a skin over 2 or more splines. So this skin is created out of geometry, right? So the gray geometry that Cinema 4D creates. The order of the spline in the Loft determines the sequence in which they are connected. So if I take out a circle and an end side, move the end side backwards, and then take out a Loft, put both of them as children of it, you will see what is happening. Right now, this Loft is creating geometry between this circle and this end side. If I alter the properties of the end side, you see how now it is creating geometry to match that. It does not matter what you have here. The Loft will try to create a skin of sorts that matches from the beginning to the end. If I add another object, let's say a cogwheel, make it a child of the Loft, notice what is happening right now. The geometry just sort of broke. You can tell the geometry is broken because of this shading. And the reason is because the order matters. So right now, this Loft is creating the skin from the circle to the end side and then to the cogwheel. And because the cogwheel is all the way here in the front, it is going from here to here and then back to here. So if I select my cogwheel and move it out, you see that now my geometry is no longer broken. The reason that the Loft is not matching my cogwheel very well is because it doesn't have enough subdivisions. So the subdivisions in U are the subdivisions happening from around the object. So I will make the garage shading lines visible so you can see what I'm doing. And notice that the more subdivisions I have, the better it matches the shape. I'm going to make the inside bigger just to show you. It does not matter what type of spline, what kind, if it's editable, if it's not, if it's big, if it's small, it does not matter. The Loft will create the skin regardless. Then your subdivisions V are the subdivisions happening from front to back. Checking on organic form gives you a little bit more of an organic shape because the Loft starts to see an average of your objects. So it just smooths things out slightly. Sometimes it works better than others. And then linear interpolation makes it so that the connection is a linear connection, as if it had hard interpolation points. Notice that otherwise there's a bump getting here to the end side. Loop is an option as well, and what loop does is that it loops then from the cogwheel back to the circle. The great thing about this is that this is all live, so you can continue to edit them as the skin is being placed on these pieces of geometry. The Loft is very useful as a builder. For example, it's really useful to create something like multiple circles that you can make copies of and move around. I'm just going to check off loop and organic form for this. I am holding Control, clicking and dragging on my keyboard to create a copy of this circle that's going to be right inside of the same Loft. The Loft also has a caps tab, which again just rounds the edges of the lid of this object. So it would round the edges of this back part and of this forward part. All right, so now let's do our Loft practice. Once again, we need to bring in a reference image, so we want to make sure that we are in front view. Click and drag that image in. Go to Mode, View Settings, and the Back tab so that we can increase the transparency. Again, I will do one with you and you will do the other one on your own. So I'm going to do the pawn and I will shift the image so that it is aligned to my Y and to my X, because I will be bringing circles in, so I want this to be as close as possible to Y. This right here is 0 in Y. Up there it is positive Y, and down here it is negative Y. Whereas in this case, this is negative X, and to the right of this is positive X. Just want to make sure that I am making that clear. All right, so the way that we're going to do this is using the Loft and then exclusively using circles. So I will be in my 4-panel view to do this so that I can see it growing. So the first thing that I wanted to take out the first circle. So it's going to be a circle parametric spline, and I want it to lay flat because we're going to build this from the bottom up. Okay, so now we want to resize our circle so that it starts to match the shape of this pawn. So the first one's going to be very small because it needs to match around this area, and then we're going to start building up. And every time that we add a new circle is because the direction of the pawn has changed. So for example, here there's going to be a new circle, then it's going to go up, and here there's going to be another circle, then it's going to go in, and here there's going to be another circle, then it's going to go out, and here, you see, so you get the idea. So the first circle that we need to add is relatively small, so I will come in here in the radius and bring that down to 45 centimeters. I know this number because I've tried this before, but usually it is trial and error. So you're going to want to play around with the numbers. Once I have this at 45, I want to take out my Loft, make my circle a child of the Loft, and now I have my first bit of geometry. I'm going to be naming these 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth, so that I can tell you move circle 2 and you know exactly which one to move. This is just going to make it easier rather than circle, circle 0.1, circle 1.1.1. Okay, so the circle is going to be named 1. Now, we're only going to be using circles, and we're only going to be moving them up in Y and changing their radius. That's all we're doing. So instead of every single time taking our new circle, making it flat, making it smaller, what we're going to do is we're going to copy the circle. And again, instead of Control C, which is copy, and Control V, which is paste, this makes the copy outside of the Loft. I don't want that. I want the copy to be inside of the Loft. So what I'm going to do is what I mentioned earlier. You hold Control on your keyboard, click and drag, and now you see that the plus sign is there. That plus sign is telling you that you're going to make a copy of whatever object you have selected. So I'll let that go. You see I have 1.1. I'm going to name that 2. And my circle 2, again, all we're doing is moving it. So I'm going to go to my move tool. I'm going to move it up slightly. I'm going to make it bigger. I can make it bigger using my scale tool by just clicking and dragging anywhere outside, because my scale will always scale uniformly because it's not editable. Or I already know the numbers. I'm just going to click here and type in 70. And now you can see what is happening, right? We're starting to build this out. Now we're going to do the same thing. Copy our circle 2, bring it upwards, name this 3, move it upwards. So I'm going to press E on my keyboard for my move tool, move it up, and this circle is going to be the one that would go right here. So it needs to be much bigger. So this one I'm going to increase to about 80. Let's do a little more. Let's do 85. And I'm going to bring it up here. Right? So you're starting to see it be built out. And this is all we're doing. We're just repeating this step as we're building this pawn. So let's continue. Again, Control, click and drag, making a copy of circle 3. I'm going to name it immediately circle 4. Move it upwards to where the direction of this pawn is changing again. And once again, I need to make it smaller. Let's make that 65. So notice, when I added this circle, it made it so that my circle 3 right here got a little bit too big. The great thing about working with non-destructive and parametric objects is that you can always go back and change it. So now that I see that my circle is too big and it is not matching that, I can go back to my circle 3 and just make it a little smaller. And now 80 would work better, or even 81. Again, this does not have to be perfect. We didn't align this pawn completely perfect. So you see there's a little bit extra here and there isn't here. That's totally okay. We're just using this as a reference. Okay, let's keep going. Make a copy of your circle 4 holding control. Move it upwards. This one would go up here. I'm only moving it up in Y. Notice that my X or my Z are not changing. I am not doing this to the circle, just in Y. This time I'll make it bigger with the scale tool. So I'm going to press T and then click and drag anywhere outside. And I see that I may need to have another circle. So I'll bring this down to here. Make it a little smaller. There we go. So my 4.1, which I'm going to name 5, is going to be 72.0. I'm going to round this out. I'm going to do 72. And now I'm going to continue. That's 47. Again, notice, now I need to make my 7 circle a little bit bigger. So I will do that. Now let's make this copy. So this one's going to be a big deal, my circle 9, because if I bring up my circle 9, you see here's where kind of we start building up. If I just bring it up and make it smaller, you see that it makes that curve for us. We don't want that curve. We want something flat here, and then we want to start building up. So my circle 9 is actually going to stay in the exact same position as my circle 8, but it is going to be smaller. So I'm going to press T and make it smaller. Can't really see what I'm doing, right? We can see it here a little bit. You see that it is smaller and they are sharing the same space. We might need to fix this a little bit later on. So I just left it at 30 for now. And now I'm going to make a copy for 10. Bring this up, right? So here now you can see 30 was way too small. So this one's going to go right here and it's going to go out. But the 9, I'll go back to it, needs to be at 34. So this is how those circles are looking. Number 9 has 34 centimeters of radius. Number 10 has 32 centimeters of radius. Let's do 33. Let's round that out. And now we can just build up. $12 and $13 are going to share the exact same space in terms of the position in Y, but 13 is going to be bigger because it's the same situation as down here. And I'm always making sure to round out my numbers. Something that's great as well, you can make the last circle. So let's say this 18.1 is going to go all the way up here. And then I can add circles in between. So this one, 18.2, is in between those two. 18.3 would be up here. So this is just another way to work. You kind of build the first one and the last one, and then you start building them out. Just make sure that you are also naming them appropriately as you are done with them. Maybe I need one between 18 and 19. I'm just going to name that one 18.5 so that I don't have to go back and rename all the other ones. I just want to make this more circular. You can always test out how your object is changing based on which one you add by just deactivating it. So you can see that when I added that one, I just added more geometry to make it more circular. And there we go. That's our pawn. Something we can do is go to our loft and increase the subdivisions to give it a little bit more definition. So if I increase them in U, so going around, and in V, going up and down, see how much more defined it is getting when I am adding subdivisions in V. And again, this is all live, so you can always go back to, let's say, circle 10, make it bigger, make it smaller, so that it fits it better. But this is the general idea. Okay, so now do the same thing with the bishop and upload that to the assignment. Then we have the sweep. The sweep object requires two splines. The first one is the contour spline, which defines the cross section and is swept along the second spline, which is the path, in order to create the object. So I will draw something really quickly here in my front view with the sketch tool. And then I will take out a flower spline. I will make both of them children of my sweep. And right now what is happening, again, there's a lot of broken geometry, and it is because the size of my spline is very small in comparison to the size of my flower. So my flower is trying to go around it, but it's too big. So if I make this smaller by scaling it down, you will get a better visual of what the sweep does. So the sweep is taking object A and using it to go along object B. So again, whatever object B is will be drawn with this flower. So if I go to my object B and I continue to draw, notice how everything is getting added to the same spline object. And we can very quickly generate geometry. Again, whatever object A is going to be swept around object B. So instead of a flower, if it was a star, again, make sure that it is the right size because this is too big. And it is going around object B. So now with the star, this is how it looks. You can see the star here. You can change the settings of your object A. If you flip the order, you will get very different results. Because now the spline is going around this star. And this spline is all of these things. So make sure that your path is always your object B and your contour is always your object A. Some settings that would be useful here would be your end scale, which makes the end of each of these splines be smaller than the start. Your end rotation, which rotates the end of the spline. And then your start and end growth, which is really useful for things like animation, because right now the start is at 0, the end growth is at 100%. If I make the end growth be at 0 and then I would go and animate it, you can see how it would look like this is drawing itself. Lastly, the caps menu is exactly the same in this object as well. So I can make this have some nice rounded beveled edges. And now let's work on the sweep practice. So this one is inspired by this. It is a Maxim tutorial. I unfortunately cannot find the original article that I found this from, but it is a Maxim tutorial that shows you how to create this. So this is what we're following. This is what we're going to try to recreate. So again, we need to be in front view because we're going to be working with splines. I'm going to click and drag and drop my sweep in here. And I will go to mode, view settings, and the back tab to increase the transparency of it. And I don't have to move or rotate this one because the sweep doesn't necessarily care where the splines live at. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to create one spline path for each of these letters. They're all going to be separate letters. Be aware that the least amount of points that you have, the smoother your curve will be. The more points you have, for example, if I'm trying to get a perfect circle with all these points, these are now more things for me to start moving and fixing, right? But if I just have one here, another one here, another one here. Okay, we're not going for a perfect circle, but you get the idea. These are much easier for me to position than all of this. So if you want a very curved letter, then you want to try to not have as many points. Something else is, for example, right here, this point, I had to change the forward tangent so that it would allow me to go down. But I think that it has like a bit of a sharp turn there, and I don't like that. So what I'm going to do to fix it, instead of using the Spline Smooth tool, I'm just going to reset it. So right now it's the soft interpolation point. So I'm going to double click on it to make it into a hard interpolation point so that it's a straight line. And then I'm going to double click on it again, and it just made it into a soft interpolation. And now I can just move the tangents, and it'll be a little bit less sharp. All right, so I have my S. I will name that S and make sure that as I continue going, I don't have anything selected so that they all come out in their own object. Here, hold Shift to position this upwards and make sure that this one here, the backwards one, is not crossing the forwards one. That's my W. Remember, if you don't like how your spline is looking, Control Z. I'm just going to make a copy of this E, so I'll name it E, and then I'll do Command C, Command V. Select all the points and move them to the right. And that's E2 for the second E. And that's my T. This is my exclamation mark. Okay, so we have the word suite here. And as we are adding contour splines, we're going to need to change the position of these points in Z, because right now they are all just flat on the XY plane. But as we add contour, the contour is going to cross itself. And if we want to recreate this, notice that nothing here is crossing itself. So let's start with the S. Let's take out a star spline. Press T on my keyboard and click and drag outside to make the whole thing small. I will then take out a sweep and bring in my S and my star. Make sure my star is the first child. And notice here it's still a little bit too big, I think, so I will still make it smaller. And I'm going to name the sweep S. Now that I have that, using the shortcut Q to activate and deactivate the spline, I will start moving points around back towards Z and rotating them so that we can have this not crossing itself. So I will deactivate it, select the point, activate it, move it back. Deactivate it, select the point, activate it, maybe move it forward and rotate it a little bit. I can also fix the spline point if I don't like how it looks. And right here, I am having an issue with this point right here. So I'm going to use the spline smooth just to smooth it out slightly. Not too much, it's at 100%, that's way too much. There we go, 20%, just a little bit. Okay, now that I have this, I want to recreate the look of this. We're already almost halfway there. So we're going to learn something new, which is opening this details tab down here. We get another spline that controls the scale of our sweep. So this is the start scale and this is the end scale. And what we want is that the start and the end are all the way down. Meanwhile, the middle is all the way up. So I will bring these down and then move the tangent that comes with it to make it bigger in the center. I probably want this to be bigger, and in that case, instead of continuing to mess with the spline that we created, I'm just gonna make the star itself a little bit bigger. So pressing T and then scaling it up. Something else, just to get a little bit closer to the reference image, you see that up here, there's a little bit of that spline and down here as well. So I will add that. So I'm gonna go back to my front view, make sure I'm in point mode. Click on my S here so that I can add it to it. Then go to my spline pen tool and I will add, click and drag up here and click and drag down here. And this is what we get. They're a little bit big, but if I want them to be smaller, I would have to take out a brand new sweep and make those changes. So we're gonna leave them like this. Okay, so now for the W, we're going to once again take out a sweep, put the W as a child of it, name the sweep W. And for the W, let's use a flower, make it a child of that W and make it much smaller. So press T on your keyboard, click and drag towards the left to make that smaller. And we're gonna reduce the amount of petals that are in this flower to the minimum amount, which is 3. All right, now let's move the point so that this isn't crossing itself. So again, with my W selected, make sure that when you want to deactivate the parent of a child of a generator, you have the child selected. Otherwise, it will not work. All right, so deactivate, select the point, activate, move back. Some will need to be moved back, some will need to be moved forward. These are crossing themselves, so we are going to need to fix them, but we'll fix them later on. I'm just going to make sure that this W isn't crossing the S. Now we want to twist this onto itself. Okay, so we're going to go to our sweep and increase the end rotation. We're going to keep going until this completely twists onto itself, something very drastic, let's say 3,000 degrees. Right? You see how it's twisting onto itself. However, this part right here, that is the geometry breaking because there's not enough information here, right? So this and this, these 2 points are very far away from each other. And because of that, there are not enough subdivisions in the center to make this look nice. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go to our W spline, and down here where it says interpolation, we're going to change that to uniform. And what this means is that it is going to split points evenly across the entire spline. It doesn't add any new points, it's just how it is interpreting it. And while we do that, we want to increase the amount of points, right? So right now it is interpreting 8 points between the start of the spline and the end of it. So we're going to just increase that amount to, we can be a little ridiculous in this case. Let's go to 60. Great. We do still need to fix these tips of the W. So what's happening here is that there's a very sharp edge, so we need to fix that. To do that, we're gonna bevel these points. This is actually called chamfer. We're gonna take that 1 point and split it into 2. So you can right click anywhere on your viewport and you'll get a menu of a bunch of different things that you can do while you're in point mode. What we want for this is the chamfer. I'm gonna show you how it looks without the sweep activated and then with the sweep activated. Click and drag towards the right and notice what it is doing. It took the 1 point and split it into 2 for all of them. I'll do that again. And now if you wanted to continue fixing it, for example, I would want to continue fixing this. I would once again go in here, select these now and maybe move them forward so that this isn't crossing itself. All right, so with the knowledge that we have right now, making that second E would be pretty hard. So we're gonna take it a little easier. And for that first E, let's create it with the cogwheel. So again, take out a sweep, take out the contour spline that you want. Make the E and the contour spline children of the sweep. Name the sweep. And obviously change the size of the cogwheel because it's huge. So go to the scale tool, click and drag outside and make it smaller. What I do want to do here also is to move these points a little bit just to give it a little more 3D feel. Okay, for the second E, we're going to do something similar. Let's just get like a rounded rectangle. Now that we're here, click on the rectangle, check on rounding, and let's just increase that more. And then we're going to make the width be a little bit bigger than the height. I will then also move these points. And in the case of this E, let's go to the caps menu and let's increase the size so that we have nice caps at the end of it. Let's also do that for the first E. We can also do that for the W. Let's never forget our caps. They are always nice and helpful and they make things look more finalized. Here we don't need them because they're way too thin. All right, so the last one is a circle, so we can do that. Let's take out the sweep. And one thing I want to do here in the caps menu is that you see in this image, there's like a little bit of a extra extrusion happening here. We're going to do that with the caps. So in the caps tab, I'm going to go to load preset, and here are a bunch of different cap presets that we can add to it. Let's just add one that looks similar. For example, this one. That's a little bit too big for me, so I'm just going to make that slightly smaller. So I changed the size of it, and that looks about right. So go back and fix things as much as you want. For example, I need to fix right here. This seems a little bit too tight and there's giving me like a wrinkle. So I'm going to go to my T spline and I will, with my spline smooth, just smooth that out slightly so that that wrinkle isn't there. For the last one, that's going to be relatively easy. So let's use a circle as well. I'm going to copy the word exclamation and just paste it here. Make the circle much smaller. And then for the lollipop itself, let's do that with a different one. Let's use the lathe instead. So we're just going to wing this. So I'm going to go in here. I will take all of these and put them in a null so that I can hide them from my viewport. And then I know that for my lathe, I need to be as close to Y as possible. So I will go to my spline pen tool and create the outline of a lollipop. Hold shift to break this, and again, inner spline. In this case, I will need to add another point right here because these two need to align to each other. And I would need to fix that, but I'll do that in a second. And these two need to align to each other. Okay, so let's make sure these are zeroed out. So press 0 and bring them in here. Press 0 and bring them in here. Perfect. Take out a lathe. And that's the lollipop for us. Now I will make my null visible again. And I will place the lollipop where it has to go. And let's continue fixing things a little bit. So for example, I don't want this to cross here. So I will go to my T and select the point that I need to move. Okay, I think this is it for our sweet exercise. Let me just bring this into the null while it's here and just name this null sweet. The last generator that I will show you is the Spline Mask. And the way that it is used is to cut out or connect different spline shapes. It works better when all of the splines are smooth and are all in the same plane. So I will show you this with parametric splines. So if I take out a rectangle and then a circle, bring the circle up and make both of them children of the spline mask. Because my spline mask is set to union, it will combine this into one spline, which would be really useful because then I can go into my extrude, make my spline mask a child of the extrude, and now I have this shape. Play around with the different modes. This is the rectangle spline and the circle spline as children of the spline mask in a union mode. I'll turn on my extrude so you can see it better. Now I'll change the mode from union to A subtract B, B subtract A, and, or, an intersection, which is a combination of and or. All right, our last practice for this video is going to be with the spline mask. So we're going to take out our smiley faces. Once again, we need to be in front view. Click and drag. Mode, view settings, and increase the transparency. Here, we're going to do together the surprise smiley face, but I want you guys to then, for homework, pick any of the other ones. So you're just going to turn in 2. It could be the happy one, the just smile one, or the angry one. I do not care which one you pick. Just make sure that you are aligned in it. So I'm just going to rotate it a little bit so that it is aligned better. All right, so let's create the shapes that make up this smiley face. First, we're going to take out a circle. I'm going to align the smiley face with that circle as good as I can. There we go, circle spline. Let's take out another circle spline to make the mouth, making it smaller by scaling it down. Thing here is that this is not just a circle, this is an ellipse. So it is bigger in the width than it is in the height. So I'll check on ellipse and increase the radius. And now for the eyes, let's just copy the circle point 1. I'm going to name this face, mouth, and eyes. Let's do eye 1. Take this and bring it up here and let's size it appropriately using the 2 radiuses. Once we're happy with this, I'm gonna make it editable. And what I want is to add points so that I can get this shape. So with my spline pen, I'm going to hold Control so that I can add cuts. And I will add one here and another one right here. And now I will move this guy all the way here and double click on it to make it a hard interpolation point instead of a soft interpolation point. Let's go to model mode, Command C to copy I1, Command V to paste it and name it I2. Move it to the other eye. Does not have to match the reference perfectly. We've already been over this. We're just using this as reference. All right, so this is how this looks. If we were to want to give this some geometry right now, so for example, if I take out an extrude and make all of these children of the extrude, first, the extrude only recognizes the first child, so we do need to come in here and check on hierarchical. But second, what the extrude is doing is just extruding all of these individually, right? And we don't need that. We need first for it to be a cutout and then for it to extrude. So before we extrude it, we're going to use the Spline Mask and bring in all of our spline as children of the Spline Mask. And then here, I want to change the mode from union to OR, and then make these children of the extrude. So what OR is doing is that it's taking the face and subtracting all of these from it. Go to caps and add some nice rounded edges. And one thing I want to do as well, you see here that we can see kind of where all of these are connecting. I don't really want to see that. I want to smooth that out. So to do that, let's just go to face and we're going to do something similar to what we did earlier, right? Where it says spline interpolation is in uniform right now. We're just going to increase the points. And what that's doing, it's almost like adding segments, right? So look, the more segments we have, the smoother it is. Let's do the same thing with the mouth. And the eyes are fine. Great, that is the Spline Mask plus the extrude. So now do that with any of these other faces.